So this is day 2 of, giving my little 10-minute presentations, and you'll notice some things are a little different. I'm standing. This is going to make things a little different. I'm also not at home. I'm actually right outside the branch. The sort of I think this specifically is the understory, and then the branch is up there and things like that. And I hope that having this change of scenery, it's kind of interesting to talk. On the other side is all just like a purple sky and a lot of trees, and there used to be actually a bench and a random chair kind of close to where I'm standing, but those aren't there anymore, and that's what I was originally going for when planning this out. Planning this out, very generously stated. I just wasn't expecting. I realized that the success of my last video came from the fact that I picked a time when everybody was out of classes, and today when everybody was out of classes, I was also subsequently out of classes. So there's a little bit on why I'm here and what I'm doing. And today I'd like to primarily talk about the dark-eyed junco. And please, I know that I'm going to continuously say the black-eyed junco, because that's what I thought I heard the first time I heard it. And every subsequent time that I researched it, it kept correcting me to say dark-eyed junco. So I'm not sure if those are two different species. I'm not sure, what the case with that is. But what I always intend, dark-eyed juncos, regardless of anything that I would say, unless I make it very explicitly clear otherwise. And the reason I've chosen to talk about dark-eyed juncos today has to do with the fact that my roommate Harini has gotten really into bird watching lately, and I'm not gonna lie, I couldn't tell you why. That's something I'm realizing I should ask her about. That's something I'll ask her about, and that won't be part of this presentation, but I will know, and that will be important to know. And so she's been kind of getting into it. She'll casually, at first she was just occasionally saying that I'm headed to the botanical gardens, I'm headed to stargaze, I'm headed to tree gaze, and eventually it became bird watching, and it eventually became actually formal bird watching to the point where she was waking up at 7 a.m. to go bird watch with some of her friends. And she even invited me to go on one of these sessions, and the night before I was totally committed, day of 6:30 a.m. totally flicked. Now fall semester me would have never done that. Fall semester me was locked in on her morning stuff, but it's been a rough several quarters, and I'm not sure if that excuses my decision not to go. She certainly says it does, and she seems to be more of an appropriate judge in this case. I felt that if I was on her end, I also would have justified that and seen that coming. I may be biased for saying this, but this is to say that Harini is just absolutely completely into bird watching, and it's gotten to the point where when I see a bird I think of her, and I try to think of what she would call it, or I try and send it to her and ask what it is. And I feel like that's a beautiful, I don't want to say that's a beautiful way to connect with other people, because that's a flat basic sentence that everyone has heard, but really the world is at times the people that make it for you. And this is a double-edged sword. This is very much a double-edged sword. You've got associations with someone you don't talk to anymore, and the associations last longer than you're talking to. But I feel that perceiving everything in your own way and knowing only the things you know is a stable way to live, granted, but it's a very flatline way to live. And I feel that I want to value more nuance than stability. I'd rather go through the pain of remembering an association I don't want to than never having that association in the first place. And this is all a very fancy scientific way to say better to have loved and lost than ever to have loved at all, which if you'd asked me a week ago, I would have heavily disagreed with. I hated that I had let myself love so much that it was ruining almost every aspect of my life. But it relatively quickly, actually, these associations did one of two things. They either regressed to what they were before, or they became something new. So for example, I like to think of a lot of things in my life as what did I get to keep in the divorce. I'm not sure if this is a great way to look at things. I would definitely look back at this, maybe I'll question this idea, but for now I'm looking at what do I get to keep in the divorce? What was mine before him? And these are things like Eurovision, these are things like The Strokes, Franz Ferdinand, anything like that. And I'm going to sound so dumb. I'm so indie. I'm gatekeeping my favorite artists, but it goes a little bit beyond that, because I personally don't actually care if he listens to them or not. I don't care if he continues to be a fan of them or not. what I care is that I have an association with these bands and these things before him. Something else, like for example, rock climbing, I had such little personal vested interest in, and what personal vested interest I did have solely to do with getting closer to him. And that's not something I kept in the divorce. That's something that I would, if I ever encountered again, would have to be in a new context with new people who will have better associations, who, you know, I know better, you know, maybe someone like Tayu, or sometimes I'll just see people walking around with their backpack and their climbing shoes attached to the top of their backpack. And, you know, at first I'm like, damn, that's, like, you really could have kept that to yourself. But it, like, you know, it's such a vast, diverse sport. To reduce it down to one guy is really not the right way to go about doing things. So that's a little bit about why I'm talking about dark-eyed juncos, is because this is something that's developed a completely new association within me. I had never known anybody who was into bird watching. I had never personally been into bird watching. And, you know, I see a pretty bird and I take a picture of it, but I couldn't care less what species it is, what sound it makes, where it's from, what it does. You know, I will appreciate objective natural beauty. I will do that. But I've never really pushed it on to the next step. I've never associated that with anything I cared about. And now I have this association. Now I have this association of bird watching, bird identifying, bird listening, bird observing, just birds. I have that association with someone I really deeply care about, my roommate, Karini. And so I saw a bird today as I was walking out. I walked out to the library and I was wearing this kind of really beautiful fit, and I was just taking some pictures, and you're trying to build my confidence. And I saw a bird, and my first instinctual thought happened almost before I thought about it, was take a picture and send to Karini. And she just replies, dark-eyed junco, smiley face, like colon parenthesis. And that was something that was very beautiful to me. So I did a little bit of research on the black-eyed juncos, on the dark-eyed juncos, because I thought this would be interesting. And if you know anything about birds, you're definitely hitting your head already by this point, but I've also heard them being pronounced juncos. I'm not totally sure if that's how you're supposed to pronounce them. I've been saying juncos because she's been saying juncos, and she is my link to the bird world. But I have heard juncos, and if that's the correct word, you know, that would do it for you. But yeah, I forgot, I'm not gonna lie, I listened to some objective facts about them on my way down to class today. I forgot very many of them. I think the only thing I retained is that they're about 6-7 inches in length, give or take, and that they primarily come out in winter, which is pretty ironic, because why did I see a dark-eyed junco in May in one of the hottest states in the continental West? Why was that there? And I thought about it for a bit, and you know, like, yes, it's pretty breezy today. I'm in a sweater. I was wearing a jacket at the time. Maybe there's that. And I decided to see what is sort of the global perception on juncos. What are they? Who are they? You know, we've got hummingbirds, these really fast-paced. We've got woodpeckers. They're like these sort of like material, crafty, you know, sort of associations. And I had absolutely no associations with juncos. And my first thought was to develop some kind of association for what a junco is. And to many, many online poets, lots of Substack articles, lots of Medium articles, they all seemed very much to be some kind of a beginning of winter, and that the jumping of juncos around sort of felt like the lifting of snow from the ground. And that was reflected in their biological patterns. You know, they migrate a little bit south in the colder months when they're not breeding, and they move back up north when it's breeding season. So they're really not here to breed. Relatable. But yeah, also the word junco comes from, I forget what, you know, origin this is, but I read that it means to rush. And this sort of has to do maybe with the fact that they jump around very quickly, and that also provides a bit for the snow illusion that was being talked about earlier. And the last thing that I remember culturally from juncos was a story of the junco and the coyote, in which a junco was singing a very beautiful song that a coyote wanted to pop in on. That said, they wanted to memorize the song so that they could mimic it and try and attack more juncos to eat them. But when the bird refused, the coyote tried to snap at it, but bit a rock instead, and that's actually why coyotes don't have molars today. And this story started to take me down a bit of a tangent on oral storytelling because there was a lot to be said. The essay I read particularly, had very little to do with the story of the coyote and the junco. It very briefly, like a sentence or two, just saw what it was. It was way more so about the correct intonation and the correct, what linguistic properties it has that make it so significant to, write about in the subsequent essay. But yeah, that was the best tidbit I could get. That I couldn't even find what source material they had got that from, and I just have to believe some random scientific article on linguistics that the story of the coyote and the junco is that of not being a trickster? I'm not sure. Hopefully I find some more. Okay, that's my presentation.